Hey, Ben.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Sweet.
yep,
How's it going?
good, good. Let me get the green screen set up here.
I gotta go close my windows because the sun is just killing me.
Hey Logan, sorry about that. Are you able to hear my audio okay?
Hey, Mike. Yep. No problem. Ben's here too. I'm getting the green screen set up.
Perfect. I appreciate it. Mr. Evans, how are you doing this fine day?
Pretty good, man. How you doing?
I'm not too bad. I'm gonna apologize. I was planning to have my camera ready, and then my cat decided that no, it was gonna lay down on my lap and I couldn't move. And so I'm gonna spare everybody the horrible experience of sharing my face today, if that's okay.
You can just put the cat on video. We'd all like that better, I'm sure.
I could do that because my cat's a ham and she'll
Is
never
it?
get off or give me the computer again.
It's awesome. Uh, how are things there? Are you still in Minnesota? No, you were in San Francisco, right? Last time we talked.
Yeah, yep. No, I gave up on the snow and the mosquitoes and trekked out west, and I've been here for a while. So, although I'm going to go visit in-laws this weekend, and so I'm currently it's a balmy 70 degrees, and we have a heat warning
Mm.
that's gonna get all the way to 80 tomorrow.
How will
Uh,
you bear?
I know it's I well so I'm heading over to visit the in-laws, and there's gonna be 104. So
Oh,
I feel like that's karma.
yeah. Oh, where are they at?
They're over in Nevada.
Okay, yeah. It's dry heat. You'll be fine.
You see, but Ben, you know me. The problem I have now, if it's below 50 or above 70, like that's like a major heat wave or a major cold streak. Like there's no middle
Yeah,
ground.
yeah, that's fair.
I've shared this story, I think, in the past, but when I first moved out to California, I'd been here for a couple of years, and I drove back to Minnesota to visit my family for Christmas. And I got to North Dakota, and I called my mom, who's in Minnesota. I said, "Mom, I'm sorry, I can't make it." And she's like, "Well, what's wrong? Like, you have car problems? Like, what's going on?" I said, "No, it's negative 13." And she goes, "Oh," but she goes, "Michael, don't worry. It's so much better here. It's only negative 27." We're going the
So
wrong
you're
way.
saying you got soft is what happened.
Yes, yes. And my
Yeah.
nephews and nieces definitely enjoy making fun of that.
Nice. How is the better half?
She's doing well. I get myself in trouble with COVID-19 because like I'll make jokes like, my fiance says I'm no good at anything or whatnot. Except for now she can hear me when I make those jokes, and so she can yell across the room, be like, "That's not true." So I have to
Yeah,
be careful what I
it's
say.
fair. Hmm. Luckily, I'm on a separate floor, so I can still bullshit all I want.
Oh, nice. Yes, that's what I need to do. I live in an apartment in the Bay Area, and she has volunteered that I can have the balcony if I want to go outside, and you have that 2 foot by 4 foot balcony.
Oh yeah, it's spacious in the Bay Area, right?
Exactly.
How's it going, Logan? You're in space. Can you breathe?
Yes. Hi. Just getting things set up here. I don't know. I guess I can do Boston and Atlanta, or do you want to do Boston and I'll do Atlanta?
Yeah, I could Boston. Bobby gave me the slides and all that. So
Okay, cool. And then did you see the thing from Gene about the LinkedIn Learning in August?
I did not. Where is this?
Uh, it's basically the next virtual study thing. If you just go to the group and then should be upcoming.
Okay. Yeah, I will add that to the slide. Thank you.
Mhm.
By the way, I have to say the one thing I really really appreciate about the start screen here, the merge PHP screen you get up, is that you guys
Yeah.
are following me on Twitter. Like that makes me feel special.
Yeah, and you're following me back.
Although I have a feeling after this talk, I might get a lot of unfollows.
Hopefully not. Yeah, and if feel free to, if you want to tell people kind of about Nomad too, don't feel like you're stepping on any toes.
Oh, awesome! Yeah, if it's okay, I would like to do just a very quick shout to Ring Central, just because obviously they let me be here on company time, and then yeah, I'd love to do a quick intro to Nomad. Maybe spend like 15 seconds between the two of those.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think it would be good also to give like a quick history on Nomad, like that might be interesting for people to hear.
Yeah, no, I can definitely throw that in. One thing that I think both Logan and Ben know about me is I have no problem talking, and my fiance also points that out. I have no problem talking. So no, I'd love to share more about Nomad and kind of the history and where it's going as well.
It takes a team, and it's good to be good, or it's nice to be good at something. Well, I think we'll give people here a few more minutes to get started, couple more minutes, and then we'll go ahead and get going. Um, get my browser tabs organized. Yes, I thought I did everything correctly, Ben, but maybe I should have set up the new channel like a couple of days ago. So I'll have to give it a try and see if it's working like tomorrow or over the weekend or something. And
Yeah, we should probably like pitch it for subscribers too, because
I think
that way
yeah,
the
good.
custom URL and all.
Yeah, once we get 100 subscribers, then we'll get that custom URL. Probably worth an email to groups.
By the way, whatever you do, don't give Gene the YouTube link.
Why?
Why is that?
Just so I can harass Gene.
Oh,
Gene, hi. I don't think I've seen Gene for, oh man, probably 4 or 5 years in person. We'll have to hang out one of these days when travel becomes a normal thing again.
He usually joins the YouTube chat, but yeah. So we created a new YouTube channel for Merge PHP so that we can start streaming on that one instead of the Awesome Tech videos, and kind of have everything all in one place. Eventually, we'll see about getting all the previous videos moved over. Would be good to do. But for now, we just have the new channel, and that will be ready to go next month. So for now, we're still on the Awesome Tech Videos channel for this one. Yep. Hopefully that is not too confusing. There's a couple people on the YouTubes currently, and I think I added the wrong link to some of the events because I was like, oh, we're gonna move over to the new channel, and then like I went to go to actually start live streaming, and it was like, nope, you can't do that. Damn it. So type answer. Thanks, Gene. Yep. Okay, so I'm gonna, for those of you in the Zoom chat, typically we'll have someone ask a question in the Q&A section, and then I can answer it live with the link to the YouTube channel. So I think I recognize everybody that is all the attendees, but in case you don't know how it works, we just have the live chat disabled in Zoom to keep everybody safe and friendly. And if you want to ask questions live, you're still welcome to use the Q&A feature in Zoom. And then if you just want to follow along and chat with everybody, the best place to do that is YouTube chat. So go ahead and click on the link that I posted on the Q&A, and you can go over to the YouTube channel. And there's usually we're kind of like a split crowd between YouTube and Zoom a lot of times, but that's just how we do it here. It would be nice to figure out how to add, like, music. I think we might have to like switch over to like Bobby starting the webinars instead of me doing it, since he sounds like he has a good streaming setup on his computer there. But yeah, I just start the Zoom, and then there's like you like click on more. It's super easy to stream on YouTube from Zoom, so I'm like, keep it simple, keep it easy. So no music at the beginning, but it works. All right, Ben, Mike and Mike, are you guys ready to go? Cool.
I'm
right.
ready, although just
Oh.
very quickly for Gene, there's not a chance that I'll lead you guys in song. I know it says an incredibly bad singer. I put that on my handle as a joke. The very next day I started getting added to a whole bunch of music and like singer lists, and so I think the joke's on them, but no, you will not get me to sing.
Wow,
Yeah,
meetup canceled.
Do you play a bard in D&D? Is that where the singer comes from?
Yeah, it was a really bad joke because somebody asked me to sing at one point in time. Like, no, I'm a bad singer. I'm just gonna leave that out there. I think I've done karaoke once in my life, and like just to put in contrast how bad of a singer I am. I get up on stage and I'm sober, which might be the first problem, and I follow like a whole bunch of guys that just belt it out went crazy. And so I do my song, hand back the mic, and the guy's like, wow, that was wow, I guess thank you. All right, who do we have next? I'm like, okay, that sums it up right there.
Yep.
Guess we'll have to
I-
get Jeremy Lindblom on if we want song.
Singing is a skill that I've yet to master. So, all right. Answer live. Yeah. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us for Merge PHP July 2021. This project continues. We're all committed to doing this virtual meetups in the long term. I think it's been a good thing for the quarantine and for everybody to get together virtually. And so, yep, I think we're all planning on doing this for quite some time, so no worries there. But I did want to mention that Bobby and Chris are on vacation, not together, separately, two separate vacations. So they're not joining us. But Ben is here to represent Boston PHP, and he'll go over the stuff that Bobby normally does. And then I'm going to go over Chris's stuff. So let me share my screen here and tell you some more about Atlanta PHP. I actually lived in Atlanta. I don't know if you guys ever knew that, but I don't know if I've been to an Atlanta PHP meeting, but I did live in Atlanta at one point in time. So Atlanta meetup group here is run by Chris and a couple others. And you can find them on Meetup and good group of people. They're Southeast Premier PHP community, and their primary thing is not actually Meetup. You're welcome to join their group on Meetup and RSVP to events there. So thank you for doing that. But the primary place for everybody to check out is atlantaphp.org. That is, I think it's a WordPress site. Pressable, pretty sure that's WordPress. But that's where you can find Atlanta has a video archive. So they have done Variox, our video sponsor, has done a great job of editing our videos. And then we get them posted here under the video section. There's a couple other things to check out on Atlanta PHP. They have a Google Groups discussion, so you can post jobs and questions on the Google Groups page there. Join it. And then sponsors. Sponsors is important. Variox, as I mentioned, is a video sponsor. Shootproof is there normally in person, and obviously allow Chris to participate in everything there that happens, and a few others. I don't know if we're doing the PHP Storm giveaway this month, but normally we'll probably wait to do that. Normally you'll email Chris. He might have a couple extra. So if you're looking for a PHP Storm license or a JetBrains license, definitely email Chris at atlantaphp.org. Again, that's Chris at atlantaphp.org. And basically kind of like first come, first serve on JetBrains licenses. And he will get back to you on that. So that's Atlanta PHP. And I'm going to dive right into Austin PHP since I'm doing both meetup groups here. Similar to Atlanta, we have a meetup group here, longest running tech group here in Austin. I think we're going to start doing in-person events here in the next month or two, probably start with a beverage subgroup. Back, been a little while since we did these, but we used to do a beverage subgroup, a social event, and then a learning event each month. So I think we'll kind of kick off the in-person stuff again with a get together and have a beer event. So it's always a good reason to get together. So stay tuned for that on the details, but check us out on Meetup. And I'm sorry, I don't know Mike, I don't know what's going on with the event stuff for Austin. When I was trying to get this posted, I swear I tried like 50 times and wasted a ton of time before I'm like, all right, I give up. I don't know what's wrong. It's clearly not me, but there's the missing image at the top. I like couldn't get that working. So, but normally we'll have the events there posted. Also, Longhorn PHP is in Austin, so definitely check out Longhorn PHP. The early bird tickets, both Ben and Mike have been to Longhorn PHP in the past, and you can see our keynote speakers here. And blind bird tickets blind bird tickets are available. Conference and tutorial, very fair prices there. So check that out. And stay tuned for more news on that. Also, if you want to get in touch with us, the Longhorn PHP crew is on the Austin PHP chat. It's Texas PHP chat. It's all the kind of the same thing. I wanted to create a space that was not just Austin, so I renamed it Texas. But if you go to austinphpchat.com, and there's a link here to join the Slack group. So that's all for our stuff. Ben, do you want to take it away and tell us about Boston and Mike, and do intro for Mike? That would be great.
Cool. I am trying to figure out how to share my screen. Cool. I got it. All right. Can you see my screen? Yeah. All right. So I will intro you to Boston PHP, as Bobby's out. I was, for a short period of time, I was a part of Boston PHP, and then I moved, and now I'm actually closer to Atlanta PHP. But, since we're all remote, I guess we're all as close to any meetup as we want to be. So the meetup is at meetup.com/Boston PHP. There is a Twitter page, which is probably the best place to connect. It's also a Facebook group, which has a certain amount of participation. LinkedIn, we have presence there. It was founded in 2002, which makes it a fairly long-running meetup now. We're closing in on 20 years. Pretty exciting. There have been 284 meetups, probably a little more than that if you count the virtual meetups. There's almost 4,000 members total. That does not mean we get 4,000 attendees. We mostly focus on education, idea sharing, and open source. We used to do in-person meetups. We'll eventually again, but probably next year from the looks of things. We also do self-study groups that are led by Gene Babin, and virtual meetups, which are what you're in right here with Merge. If you want to contact us, contact Bobby Cahill for events or general information. And then if you're interested in the virtual self-studies, contact Gene. We have an upcoming self-study group on August 1st. That's led by Gene. It's a LinkedIn Learning post-pandemic challenge. You can see more info on that or sign up on our meetup page. And tonight we're super excited to have Mike Stowe from Ring Central here. He's going to present on code interfaces, patents, and copyrights. He's also going to give us a little song, so that's going to be pretty exciting. Take it away,
There's
Mike.
no song. All right, Mr. Evans, is that my cue?
That's your cue. I think you have to share to take over though.
Oh, and I need to hit record too.
Whoa.
Yeah, did you hear the voice too?
Yes, and let's see. Later, I'm gonna try this and see if it works. I might. Okay, perfect. It worked. I was telling me I didn't have permission, and that threw me off for a second. All right. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's kind of funny because three of my favorite cities, and I kid you, I was actually two of my favorite cities. I was going to say three of my favorite cities, but Austin didn't get the image on their profile page, so they've lost that right. But no, of course, is Atlanta, Boston, and Austin. So speaking of Boston, actually worked in Waltham, Massachusetts for about a year. And so a huge fan of the area. And I'm excited for when things open back up because I want to get back to the Tea Party Museum just so I can, take those crates and throw them off the boat again. I don't know why. I'm easily impressed. Of course, Atlanta with the Centennial Park as we get close to the Olympics again. If you haven't been to Atlanta, my two favorite things there, World of Coke, again, because I drink way too much soda. Number two is the aquarium. Also, a fantastic memorial for Martin Luther King Jr. So I absolutely love Atlanta. And then Austin, again, I'll give a shout out just because I have some funny stories about Austin. But one of my favorite places I've been in Austin was I was down there for UConn, and I was down there for the Kubernetes event, and we met at the Container Bar. And I thought that was the coolest thing to be talking about containers in a container bar. But anyways, I'm digressing here. So super
I
cool.
knew
Thank
it
you
was-
for having me here. What's that,
I
Ben?
knew it was gonna be food related.
It has to be food related with me. And then also I see very several familiar names in the participant section. So thank you for people who are willing to listen to me chat again. I do appreciate it. And then just one more quick shout for Longhorn. If you have the chance to go to Longhorn, it's one of the best PHP events out there, and I think it's the only PHP conference happening in the U.S. this year. So, definitely great if you have the chance to go and support the local organizers because they do such a fantastic job, and it's so important for the community. And with that, I'll get off my soapbox for a second here. And today we're talking about code interfaces or APIs, patents and copyrights. And we're going to talk about one of the most important cases that you may have or may not have heard of, but has completely transformed the industry and has kind of left us in an interesting area. And so with this, we're not going to dig into how to write APIs or all that stuff, but looking at kind of the legal aspects and look at what happened over the last 10 years and what does that mean for us today. So I'm going to kind of geek out a little bit in terms of law and history. So forgive me, but again, this case ultimately will decide the future of software. And even if you've never heard this case, even if you're not working with like web APIs, this case directly affects you in the code that you write. For those that don't know me, my name is Mike Stowe. I'd like to think that I'm an author, speaker, and consultant, although most people have said not a very good one. I spent 15 years working in software engineering before moving into the developer relations side of things. But I still try to do some coding, and I consider myself an open source and API fanatic, which is why, again, this talk. And if you're ever interested in talking about REST APIs or containerization, Kubernetes, anything along those lines, again, those are things I love talking about. I have to give a shout out to Ring Central because I work as developer relations at Ring Central, and without Ring Central, I could not be here. And both Logan and Ben had mentioned Nomad PHP. The big ask here is I'm always looking for more friends, so please feel free to follow me on Twitter, Mike G. Stowe. Also, if you have questions, feel free to reach out. If you really like the talk, you can tag Ring Central Devs and say, hey, Mike did a great talk. If you don't like the talk, ping me at Mike G. Stowe. I do give out bribes. With that said, Ring Central, no, it's not the doorbell company, if that's what you're thinking. Ring Central provides a UCaaS communication platform for all your business communication needs. So message, video, phone. And on top of that, they have APIs for voice, SMS, team messaging, meetings, and fax. Yes, fax is still a thing. Thankfully, it's only used by non-mission critical industries, such as healthcare, legal, and fintech. But with that, if you're looking for a great communication solution that also provides the API so you to customize it, RingCentral is a great company, and I'm very grateful, that they let me be here. The second shout I want to give is to Nomad PHP. And you may have heard of Nomad PHP. Cal Evans and Kathy Evans started Nomad several years ago. And they started, this is just kind of ironic timing, as a online virtual meetup group that people could get together if they couldn't attend a local in-person meetup group. About 3 years ago, I had the privilege of taking over Nomad PHP from Cal, and we wanted to try to provide more resources to people. Growing up, I grew up in northern Minnesota. The closest meetup to me was 4 hours away. I couldn't afford gas money to get to that meetup. The closest conferences at the time were ZenCon in San Jose or Santa Clara and PHP Tech in Chicago, and I couldn't afford the plane ticket or a ticket to a conference. And so we want to provide a place where everyone could come, learn, grow, and get those conference talks, get those resources, and build their skills. And what that means is every month there are live talks, just like any other meetup, but it also means you can now live stream conferences and certain events on Nomad PHP. The next one coming up is Cake Fest in October. There are 300 videos on demand that you can watch, all conference level talks, and many of them from other conferences. So if you can attend Midwest PHP, for example, you can actually watch a replay of Midwest PHP on Nomad PHP. And then also books and magazines. That includes PHP Architect. I'm going to make a quick announcement for this group so you guys get kind of the spoiler alert. Starting tomorrow, Code Magazine will be added to the list. You can access Code Magazine as well. And then also books, including books by Larry Garfield on, writing functional PHP, as well as, PHP 8, the Company Programmer's Guide to Testing by Chris Hartjes, and other great books and resources on there, all included with your membership and course certification. Now, last thing I'll do, and then I know you're like, man, stop the advertisements, let's get to the talk. The last thing I'll throw out here is the important thing with Nomad PHP is it's accessible to everyone. With the pandemic, everyone's had different circumstances. And if you're like, man, I want to grow my skills and I can afford the subscription, I want to take advantage of that, that's fantastic. We're not going to turn that down. But if you're going, man, the pandemic hit me hard, I need to grow my skills, I want to continue growing, but I don't have the money to pay for a subscription, reach out to me. We'll give you a complimentary subscription. Nomad PHP is available to everyone. No one will be turned away because of their circumstances. And that's our commitment to the community and growing the community. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop rambling about stuff and doing my advertisements, and let's get into what we're talking about today. The first is we're going to dive into a little bit of the legal aspect of code, and can code be patented? Can it be copyrighted? And there's some misconceptions in terms of what these mean. And we're going to talk about that just so we understand a base. What protection do you have, or did you have, out of the box for the code that you write? If you write code, can someone just take that code and copy it or use it elsewhere? Then we're going to talk about what happened with two tiny companies called Oracle and Google. And if you haven't heard of the lawsuit of Oracle v. Google, and then the Supreme Court case Google v. Oracle, we're going to take a look at those. We're going to look at what happened with the lower courts. We're going to look at what happened with the federal circuits. We're going to look at what the final ruling was. And I think that leaves some discussion in terms of, did the Supreme Court get it right? And then we're going to look at what's that actually mean for today and moving forward, so you can make sure that the code you write is protected, and that you don't have to worry about somebody just taking your code and copying it and pasting it and selling your software as someone else's. So with that said, the big disclaimer of the day: this is not legal advice. You're going to hear me say this a million times. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not offering you legal advice. I'm trying to provide an informative kind of educational aspect from my perspective of what happened. But at the end of the day, please, please, please do not say, I did this because Mike said I could. Please don't contact Ring Central and said, hey, Mike said I could do this, so I did. This is not legal advice. It's purely, again, for informational or we're going to call it entertainment purposes only, if that makes sense. As you hear about different things, if you have questions or it sparks ideas, talk to a licensed and experienced attorney, and preferably one who's experienced in this field of code, patent, and copyright. Okay, so I'm just making sure in the chat there's no Mike said I could do this. Fantastic. Moving on. So we're going to talk about APIs, and everyone here I think is familiar that an API is an application programming interface. And when we think of APIs, we often think of APIs like REST or SOAP or GraphQL or RPC. And it's important for us to remember that while we traditionally think of APIs as web APIs, and while 90% of my talks are on web APIs, all API is an interface for two programs to communicate. And so that means it's not just going to be with the web, but it could be something where it's a Java API, for example. And so we look at the code interfaces. Code interfaces are designed to allow you to interact with existing classes. So in PHP, there are interfaces. Obviously, we have the code interface, but the interface could be how you interact with a class library, or the interface could be how you interact with existing functions or existing PHP classes or third-party PHP classes, not just the PHP term of interface, where you can create an interface and then your class implements that interface. On one hand, it's the same because interface is describing kind of that generic how it interacts, but it could also be the underlying code of that interface if that interface is simply providing a communication mechanism to the underlying class. So if that interface isn't doing something that is functional but was more transitional to the underlying functional code, that would be a code-based interface. So again, that's what we're going to really be talking about today when you hear the term interface, is how a program communicates with any other part of that program, or how that program communicates with any other program or any other library. Another example of an interface in the PHP world, of course, is WordPress. In WordPress, you have several helper functions. So if you're building templates or you're building plugins, you can take advantage of underlying WordPress functionality. Those functions or methods themselves are essentially API functions or interfaces. So for example, your action hook function or your filter hook function, those would actually be considered interfaces when we talk about code, because that function itself, the single line of code that you call, doesn't perform any action. It calls underlying code that performs an action. So that's, again, we talk about the interface versus the functional code. And this is where this case becomes so important. So again, the challenge here is, if it's not very ambiguous, where does the interface start and where does it end? Where does functional code start and where does functional code end? What's the overlap? And that's where we're really going to look at what part of the code can be patented and what part of the code can be protected by copyright, versus what part of the code can someone hypothetically freely copy and paste without any concern. Now, I say any concern, I mean any concern of being found legally liable. One thing that's important, and another big reason this is not legal advice, is in the US, you can sue anyone for just about anything. People have sued people because hot coffee was hot. And so just because they may be protected from being legally liable doesn't mean that they're protected from the court case and incurring legal expenses and then having to prove their defense, or rather defend themselves beyond a preponderance of the evidence. So with that in mind, let's look at code copyrights and patents and start digging into the legalese of all of this. Again, with the big disclaimer, Mike is not a lawyer. So first question here is, how do we patent code? And years ago, I had the privilege of being involved in a patent case. And it was brought in to review code to see if it infringed on a patent. It's important to understand that code itself cannot be patented. So if you write code and you say, I'm going to patent this code, the code itself is not patentable. So you have no patent protection. The only way you can achieve a patent when it comes to code is the process, in which the process itself must either improve functionality or solve a challenge in an unconventional way. And so in the patent case that I was involved in, it wasn't the code they were looking at, but rather how the code worked, or what was the process that could potentially violate a patent. And so again, we look at that, processes can be patented. Ideas and artistic expressions, which code falls under as an artistic expression, cannot be patented. So does that mean we have no recourse for our code and there's no protection for the code? Absolutely not. Again, if we look at the patent side, if we have an algorithm or class, while the code can't be patented, the way those algorithms work together could be patented. But the reality is, unless you're doing something really, really unique, again, the patent isn't the way you're going to go. Because again, ideas and expressions cannot be patented. But code by default is copyrighted. And again, there's different questions about what's copyright law or trademark law, how these things work. And there's this idea that to have a copyright, you must file a registration with the US government. That's absolutely not the case. By default, you can create a trademark and slap TM on that trademark and start using it. And you have to do nothing to do that. You literally just say, oh, this is my trademark now, it's TM. Now, the challenge is, just because you claim something's a trademark doesn't mean it is. And so if someone else is using your quote trademark, you then have to sue to have them stop using it. But you also have to prove the validity of your trademark. And you also have to prove that you used that trademark before they did. And that's why you'll see the R in the circle, which is registered. All that means is I've registered my trademark with the USPTO or the US Patent and Trademark Office, so that if there's a question, I can say, look, it was on record as being trademarked this day. The same is true with copyright. You can use the C in the circle to say something's copyrighted. You are protected by the copyright, even if you don't say it's copyrighted, it's yours. The reason people register copyrights is if someone says, no, I created this before you, you can say, look, this is the exact date I registered it with the Copyright Office, and it's more evidence to why you did that. But someone cannot just take your code, copy and paste it, unless you provide them a license, such as an open source license, do so. So that's the good news. Your code, whether registered or not, cannot be used without your permission for the most part. And there's a big caveat on there, because there are aspects of your code that can now be used without your permission. That's what we're going to look at more as we get into this case. Again, the basic tenet up to 2005 was that all code that you wrote, whether it was an interface, whether it was a class, whether it was a function, whether it was a while, all the code you wrote could not be copied and pasted. Someone could not take your code, copy and paste it verbatim, and reuse it or claim it, again, unless you gave them that license. And that's why we saw open source licenses, because people want to have the freedom to express their code. They want to allow people to incorporate the code. They want to improve usability, and they want to drive innovation. And so that's why we saw all these standards, whether it was CPAL or Apache or MIT or GPL. But again, without those licenses, if I wanted to take, just say, for example, part of the Java library and build my own app out of it, I couldn't do so unless Sun or Oracle gave me permission to do so. And that's the way code worked up until 2005. And then we had this thing called Android that came along. Now, I'm hoping here that most people are familiar with Android. But Android was essentially an application that was built to be a mobile operating system. And in 2005, Google acquired Android with the idea of building their own mobile applications. And one of the things that was important to them is they wanted something that could incorporate a large market of developers, something to be familiar to developers, something that would allow for seamless development. And so Google approached, at the time, Sun Microsystems and said, we'd love to take this Android OS that we just acquired and make it compatible with Java SE or Java Standard Edition. And so they approached Sun, and they actually had a really good conversation with Sun Microsystems. Sun Microsystems said, sure, we're absolutely interested in licensing Java SE to you. It's just going to cost you between $30 and $50 million to use it. And the ironic part of the story is Google had no issue with that. They're like, sure, 30 to 50 million for us to incorporate this large community, for us to offer Java or seamless Java integrations into the Android operating system and create a strong ecosystem of developers, small price to pay. But there were concerns with some of the other requirements that Sun wanted to impose. And Sun had an issue that Android would be interoperable with Java SE, but not interoperable with other Java applications. And keep in mind that Sun had developed their own Java framework for mobile. And so this was the sticking point. Google basically said, yeah, we'll pay you up to $50 million to incorporate Java, but we're not willing to make it accessible across the entire network. We want this to be something where they're not using the Java Mobile Edition, they're using Java SE, and this is how it works. So you can start to see where the issue begins. But it's important because this directly affects the case. It's important to understand that we start off with a general consensus, but we couldn't reach a meeting of the minds, meaning they never could agree to terms. So what happened? Well, Google decided we can't use Google SE, we'll just move on. Except that Google took advantage of another open source framework that had incorporated the Java APIs. And so essentially what they did is they said, you know what, that's fine. We can't take Java SE. We're going to take a part of Java SE, about 0.4%, to allow for Java developers to build into our operating system. We're not going to copy the functional code or the entire backend, but we are going to take the interface that would allow Java developers to build a Java app and have it be supported by our Android OS. And these numbers start to become really important because these are numbers we're going to see later in the case. So again, Google says, that's fine. We don't reach consensus. We're going to move ahead. We're going to take 0.4% of your code base and build it into Android. And I think a lot of people are going, wait a second. You're saying that Google just said, without your permission, we're going to take a portion of your code and reuse it. And they thought that was legal and they could get away with it. And the answer is yes. That's exactly what happened. Well, Google releases Android in 2007. Sun actually publicly praises Google on bringing Java and opening the system to Java developers. But at the same time, behind the scenes, they had kind of that challenge of doing what's right for the developer community and also doing what's right for the business. And even though they're publicly congratulating Google, they're fuming behind the scenes. They are just completely ticked off that Google took this code and did this, but they don't feel like they can say that publicly without getting backlash themselves. So it's one of those kind of passive aggressive or backhanded compliments. Hey, great job stealing our code is essentially kind of how Sun phrased it. And then Oracle acquires Sun Microsystems in 2010. And Oracle says, wait a second, let me get this straight. Google took 0.4% of the code, 10,000, 11,000 lines of code, built their own system off of our technology that we acquired. We actually have a mobile edition OS as well. They can't do this. And while some may not have been willing to take them on, we're large enough. We're going to sue Google for both patent and copyright infringement. And thus starts, again, one of the most important cases for software in our era. So Now we know where we're going. We understand Oracle's position. We also understand Google's position of, what are you going to kind of do about it? We think we can do this. And this goes to the first district court for a trial and ends up being a jury trial. And the trial was broken up into two separate stages. They broke it up into a patent stage and a copyright stage. And the copyright stage would occur first. And so what they did was they wanted the jury to look at the different merits of everything that happened with Google taking this code and decide basically on two counts. Did they violate the copyright protection? If so, what are they liable for? And did they violate patent protections? If so, what are they liable for? And so the first court proceeds, and the jury finds that, Google has indeed infringed on copyrights owned by Oracle. What they found was that Google took advantage of the range check function. With the range check function, basically that was functional code. They copy and paste it. They're in violation of copyright there. They found that they violated the single sign-on copyright protection. And interestingly enough, the API documentation. So when they look at what they used, again, they said, okay, range check, SSO, and API documentation. They also, struggled with 8 security files that were there that they couldn't determine whether or not the security files that Google copied were protected under fair use. So while they're finding copyright infringements, and they even found the API documentation to be copyright infringement, there's other areas where they're struggling. And again, Oracle's like, hey, wait a second, we don't like this. So upon Oracle's request, the judge actually overturned their verdict on the security files and also found in favor of Google for copyright infringement on the security files themselves. So right off the bat, things are kind of going Oracle's way. The second phase, though, the jury heard the arguments on the patents, and there were 2 specific patents that Oracle was suing, claiming that Google had infringed. And again, remember we talked about how patents are the process and how very difficult they are to enforce when it comes to code. The jury concluded that no, they didn't infringe on the patents. They violated the copyright. They didn't infringe on any of the patents. And so the patent lawsuit was effectively dismissed by their decision. And so we look at kind of this outcome, we're starting to see, okay, code's protected by copyright. Oracle violated the copyright, Google violated Oracle's copyright protection, but it wasn't a patent infringement. Seems pretty straightforward. So far, so good, except Judge Alsup on May 31st of 2012 had final say. And he looked at this and said, you know what? I'm going to find in favor of Oracle for the range check function and the security files. Remember, the jury couldn't decide on the security files. The judge overruled them and found for Oracle. But the judge also threw the first major wrench in this ruling when he said the APIs themselves are not copyrightable. So despite the jury finding API documentation and APIs being copyrightable, the judge says APIs are not copyrightable. That cannot be enforced by law. And so he overturned the jury's ruling in that regard. So what ends up happening is a judgment of $150,000 in favor of Oracle. Now we're talking millions and millions and millions of dollars. And so Oracle's not happy. Google's thrilled. And ultimately what happens is neither one want to deal with it. Oracle says $150,000 isn't worth my time. I'm not even going to try to collect. I'm not going to get the judgment. We think the judge got this wrong, overturning the jury. And so needless to say, Oracle is going to appeal this case because this is the future of Java and the future of their copyright protection. But what's interesting is the statement that the judge used. And the judge, in his summary of ruling, made the point that so long as the specific code used to implement a method is different, anyone is free under the Copyright Act to write his or her own code to carry out exactly the same function or specification of any methods used in the Java API. It does not matter that the declaration or method header lines are identical. What makes this so important is this judge is basically saying that you can take the exact same interface. So your class and methods can have the same declaring code as long as the functional code or the underlying code that is called from your interface or even your API class is different. It can do exactly the same functions. It can operate exactly the same specification. It can do exactly what another program does as long as the code itself is different. Now, the interesting thing here is you think about copyright. What the judge is essentially saying is you can structure the book exactly the same way as another author. You can have the same chapter titles. You can have the same chapter styles as long as, and you can even tell the same story as long as the story is told in a different way. That's essentially what the judge is saying in terms of this. And so, again, this is a really, really important statement that plays, down the future. Again, Oracle does not agree with this statement. They do not agree with the judge's ruling, and that's where they're like, no, they basically copied us. The judge continues saying, when there's only one way to express an idea or function, then everyone is free to do so and no one can monopolize that expression. And while the Android method and class names could have been different, copyright protection never extends to names or short phrases as a matter of law. So even though Oracle is saying, wait, they could have done it differently, the judge is saying, first of all, for this to be seamless and allow Java SE developers to build an Oracle, there's only one way that they could have done it. And secondly, even if they had made it different and forced their developers to learn a new system, that doesn't matter because copyright protection doesn't extend to that. Very concise, very straightforward, to the point ruling, and the case is now settled. Again, Google's been ordered to pay Oracle $150,000. This is the end. This is settled back in 2012. And actually, one more quote I want to throw there. But the names are more than just names. They are symbols in a command structure wherein the commands take form. Again, the judge understanding that this isn't just a naming convention. This is how developers are going to use and interface their experience from Java SE into the Android OS system. So again, three major statements from the judge on the summary ruling. But again, when I said that case was settled in 2012, just kidding. Oracle takes it to the federal circuit for an appeal. And the federal circuit says, Judge Elsof, you got this wrong. The overall structure of Oracle's API packages is in itself creative, original, and resembles a taxonomy, which is exactly what an interface is. It's a taxonomy. And obviously it was original because they created it. And it was an expression of their view for how the Java programming language should be interfaced with. And they said, so guess what? It is copyrightable. Now, they don't issue a ruling. Rather, what they say is, Judge Elsof, you need to have a new trial and reevaluate the copied API code fell under fair use. So they found a ruling that disagreed with Judge Elsof that the code itself is actually copyrightable. It's not fair use, but or it is copyrightable, excuse me, but that they did not reach a decision on fair use. And so when Judge Elsof said, that the copyright law does not extend to this interface or extend to what Oracle did, the federal circuit basically said, you're incorrect. It absolutely does. Now the question is, does it fall under fair use or not? If it doesn't fall under fair use, then Google has to pay Oracle significant damages. And if you're a legal scholar or expert reading between the lines here, you're probably going, they're trying to give them some guidance of where they think the case should end up. So we look at their ruling. There is nothing fair about taking a copyright work verbatim and use it for the same purpose and function as the original in a competing platform. Keep in mind, Java had a mobile edition and Android was going to be an operating system for mobile software. So they saw that very much as a competing platform. So again, as a legal scholar, you read this one line, there's not a lot of wiggle room in terms of where the federal circuit thinks the ruling should go. So we head to the second district court trial to evaluate, was it under fair use, which again, the Federal Circuit did not rule on, instead sent back to the lower court to decide. The second one, again, was also a jury trial. And again, it wasn't did Google copy or use their code, or is the code protected, but rather, is an interface protected by fair use? Can someone go grab the WordPress APIs, copy and paste them in their own CMS solution and claim it's fair use? And the jury found conclusively that it is. So the jury found again in favor of Google and said, no, Google has the right to take this interface, to take these 11,000 lines of code, copy and paste them verbatim under the fair use clause. You can guess what happened here. The Federal Circuit, again, the Oracle appeals to the Federal Circuit. And again, the Federal Circuit says, wait a second, guys. Like we basically told you what the court case outcome should have been. We told you they can't do this for competing platform. This is not fair use. Like we thought we spelled it out. Apparently you missed it. And so the Federal Circuit reverses the ruling, finding in favor of Oracle. And the big takeaway here was not that Google copied the command structure, the declaration structure, of which they only need to copy 170 lines of code, but that they copied the functional code within the interface, which then processed the command to take it to the underlying libraries and underlying code of Java. Now, this is important because the code that Google copied included code that did perform functions, but the purpose of those functions was to send it to a different class or library and have the true underlying functional code happen at that level. So again, with this said, they say, look, you got it wrong. We're once again going to send it back to the district court. And now what you can do is determine damages. So if we look at, again, how this has flown or what the flow has been, it was district court found in favor of Google in terms of the code not being copyrightable. Federal Circuit overrules. District court finds in favor of Google, that's fair use. District court overrules and now gets sent back to the Federal Circuit overrules, now gets sent back to district court for them to determine damages. So at every point in this case, the Federal Circuit has overruled the district court. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with damages. Well, before we get to damages, Google appeals the Federal Circuit's ruling to the US Supreme Court. Now, if you're wondering why do we care so much about this case, it's again because this directly refers to your code. Can a company like Google go in and take your code and use it verbatim without your permission? District court is saying if it's an interface and it's not truly the functional underlying code, yes, they can. The Federal Circuit is saying absolutely not. What happens with the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court, again, after being petitioned by Google, agrees to hear this. And here's where it gets really interesting. This becomes an all-out battle. The US government files a brief on behalf of Oracle, stating that Oracle is 100% correct. They have the correct understanding of the law, and this is how it should be enforced. On the flip side, Microsoft, Red Hat, which is now owned by IBM, and Mozilla file briefs in favor of Google, along with numerous computer scientists. And so what we're really seeing is a big divide in the computer sector in terms of which way should this go. In fact, you'll find numerous articles from well-established and respected computer authors or programming authors pointing out that, hey, the court got this wrong. The Federal Circuit got it right. Thank goodness there's some common sense. And a lot of them going, hey, this is dangerous for innovation because it means that we can have no replication of interfaces and no reusability. And even the Supreme Court itself is divided in its decision. Ultimately, the Supreme Court decides in favor of Google by a 6-2 margin. And what the Supreme Court states is that APIs or interfaces themselves are not expressions of creativity, but rather learned interfaces separate from the underlying functionality. So again, we talk about functional code versus an interface that drives the functional code. The Supreme Court basically agrees with Judge Alsop and says, no, there is a difference. Now, did they get it right? Let's look at some of the aspects of the ruling and again, understand where it came from, and also look at what that means for today. In the syllabus of the Supreme Court ruling, they make a distinction for computer programs and for APIs. They say, unlike many other computer programs, the value of the copied lines is in significant part derived from the investment of users, here computer programmers, who have learned the API systems. Given these differences, application of fair use here is unlikely to undermine the general copyright protection that Congress provides for computer programs. In other words, it's not the code that makes it fair use. It's the fact that the value comes from the ecosystem, the number of developers who are familiar with that, and it's the familiarity of that format that allows developers or allows another company to take that format or that interface, that user interface for the developers, and allow them to access their systems in a way that is familiar to them. Another way to think of this is a car. If you look at a car, it doesn't matter if you're driving a Ford, Toyota, Honda, Kia, or whatever it may be. When you get into a car, there's a steering wheel. All the steering wheels work the same way. There's a gas pedal. There's a brake. And it's not the steering wheel or the gas pedal or the brake that makes the car valuable. You don't go to a Ford dealer and say, I want to buy a Fusion because you've got this this steering wheel, or I want to do a Mustang instead because of this gas pedal. It may be the power behind the gas pedal, but this is an interface that provides familiarity. And that's how they looked at Java SE's APIs, as an interface that provides familiarity. And it's not the code that's of value, it's the familiarity that's of value. So this gets to a key point of looking at distinction between code. Again, familiarity versus functionality. If they had taken the functionality, they rebuilt the engine to Ford specs, put in a Toyota, that's a problem. That's a violation because it's the underlying functionality that's been copied. If we're just saying, look, we got a gas pedal, you got a gas pedal, they press the gas pedal down and it sends a message to underlying functionality, that's familiarity. Another example, which they reference in the ruling, is the QWERTY keyboard. It doesn't matter if you're using a Mac or Windows or Chromebook, you're using the same keyboard. You're using a lot of the same user interfaces for accessing those computers. There's differences, but the real difference is the underlying engine, not the interface you're using. They go on to say that Google's copying of the API to re-implement a user interface, taking only what was needed to allow users to put their accrued talents to work in a new and transformative program, constitute a fair use of that material as a matter of law. Now, a key part of this statement here is taking their talents to work in a new and transformative program. A key aspect of fair use is that the work is transformative. It's brand new. They also looked at other aspects in terms of, again, expanding beyond functionality versus familiarity. They looked at what the purpose of the code usage was. And again, in this case, they found the purpose of the code was to provide an interface. They looked at the amount of code replicated, again, 0.4%. And again, this one's really sticky. It was transformative in nature. Google was using the code to create a brand new system, a brand new operating system that was different from Java SE or even Java ME. So what's that mean today? And did the Supreme Court get it right, or what are the challenges we're going to face? The good news is, right off the bat, companies are less likely to sue over code reuse. Given this case, a company is now more likely to think twice before spending millions of dollars to sue you for reusing aspects of their code. There's more freedom and desire for standardized interfaces. This case essentially greenlights the ability to take an interface and replicate that interface. And the ability to replicate interfaces also means less vendor lock-in. Hypothetically, and again, Mike's not a lawyer. Don't take anything Mike is saying as legal advice. Hypothetically, a new CMS program could copy WordPress's interface mechanisms, whether that's their API or their ability, that their functions for affecting change in templates, whether it's an action hook or a filter hook. They could copy that, make that accessible, and all of a sudden, hypothetically, all the WordPress plugins that exist could work for this new CMS system and seamlessly provide those capabilities, which means that you could seamlessly move from WordPress to another CMS or vice versa. The downside is it also means that there's more risk of code being re-implemented and reused illegally, because people aren't going to know where to draw that line. And because the line is ambiguous sometimes between functionality and familiarity, we're going to see people start taking code and copying code under the guise that they're protected by the law, even though they may not be. And this is where it gets more of a challenge. And this is where, again, this impacts each and every one of us. These are things you should be aware of in terms of what the current ruling is, but you should also be aware of that while this is going to offer significant benefits, it could also open you up to harm by people copying and pasting your code at greater heights. So again, we already talked about this. Going back to WordPress, hypothetically, I can now create another CMS that copies WordPress's interface that allows every template and every plugin to seamlessly work with my application. That's again, purely hypothetical, because the question becomes, is it a transformative work? If I'm creating an application that does the exact same thing as WordPress, am I really creating something new, or am I simply stealing their ecosystem and stealing the work they've done to build my own CMS and compete with them? And this is where it gets really, really murky. And these are key questions to ask your attorney. Don't ask me, ask an attorney. Is the value of the code then that this person be copying from WordPress, is it functionality or is it familiarity? Secondly, are they only taking the pieces that are needed for their use case, or only needed to build the interface for familiarity? And this again is very ambiguous, because you can say, well, I need to take all of it for familiarity, but at some point in time, they're going to say, no, this much code was all that was needed to create an interface that was recognized. This much code drives functionality, and quite frankly, the user is agnostic to it. So no, you shouldn't have ever taken this code. Is the code used minimal in contrast to the overall application code base? So if you start taking WordPress's interface and you find that you've taken 10% of their code base, is that really minimal? One, is it just the code that's needed? Two, is it pure for familiar purposes? But number three, are you taking too much code? Because that was one of the key things the Supreme Court looked at, was how much code. And they decided that 0.4% was not significant. 10%, however, might be significant. 2% might be significant. This is kind of up in the air. And the last one, again, is it transformative, or are you competing with them? And I wish I could say that this is all very straightforward and there's no ambiguity that came from the Supreme Court ruling. And this is, after 10 years now, a decided matter. However, when we look at what the definition of transformative use cases are, again, transformative under the definition of the fair use clause of copyright law, it says transformative uses are those that add something new with a further purpose or a different character and do not substitute for the original use of the work. Going back to, we're talking about that WordPress interface and copying that and building a new CMS. Now we have a really challenging time here, because according to this statement right here, no, it's not. It's a substitute for the original use of work. Maybe if we were building a CRM and we want to enable plugins for the CRM, that would work, which raises the question, what if WordPress wants to build their own CRM? But simply creating our own CMS that allows us to bring in all the things that WordPress already did for their CMS and replace WordPress as a solution, that is not transformative. Now, you might have already gone ahead of me and said, wait a second, Didn't Java, again, you mentioned Java Mobile Edition, doesn't Java have an operating system for mobile? Isn't that what Android is? Wasn't Android a replacement for Java ME? This is where we get into challenges. Again, when we look at what the ruling in favor of Google was by Supreme Court, they said Google's limited copying of the API is a transformative use. It allowed programmers to work in a different computing environment. Java SE was intended for desktops, Android's intended for mobile devices. Google's purpose was to create a different task-related system for a different computing environment, a smartphone. So this was a big differentiator, and a big reason why they said Google was allowed to copy it is because they were taking Java SE, meant for desktops, and putting it on a smartphone, not meant for desktops. It copied the API, which Sun created for the use in desktop and laptop computers only insofar as needed to include tasks that would be useful in smartphone programs. And it did so only insofar as needed to allow programmers to call upon those tasks without discarding a portion of the familiar programming language and learning a new one. So again, what they said was, because it's a smartphone and SE was meant for desktops, and because they did just for familiar purposes, it's good. And that was written by Justice Breyer, who wrote the opinion of the court. But again, Java was already being used for phone operating systems and applications. Java ME, or Java Mobile Edition, was actually the leading, or one of the leading smartphone platforms out there. And they had contracts with numerous vendors. If you look at who's using Java ME today, it's basically no one, because everyone is using Android. Android, by copying and pasting, or Google, by copying and pasting Oracle's Java SE interface, effectively erased Java ME from the market at a time when Java ME was dominating the mobile market. So is it really transformative? They did something that Oracle's already doing. Arguably, well, Java ME is separate from Java SE. They're not the same. So because they did Java SE and not Java ME, it's okay. But wait, there's more. We now have Chromebooks. Android is used beyond smartphones, directly competing now with Java SE. Again, this creates a huge challenge for us. In terms of, now you may argue, well, Chromebook apps, Java developers not writing an app for Chromebook the same way that a Java developer is writing an app for a Windows or Macintosh computer. That's a fair point. Most Chromebook apps are web apps. But again, it gets back to the premise of, if I want to create something that supports Chromebook, or if they do more with Chromebook for these applications, that defeats literally what the justices just said. If they're saying that it was to compete in a different computer environment, and they're not competing with Oracle, well, they are. They're competing with them in the smartphone market where Oracle already is, and they're competing in the desktop market where Oracle was. So when we look at that, again, this is why I asked, did they get it right, and what's this mean moving forward? Justice Thomas, who wrote the dissenting opinion, stated, the majority acknowledges that Google used the copied declaring code for the same reason Oracle did. That's a key statement right there. The majority says they used the code for the same reason Oracle did. So by turns, the majority, referring to the 6 justices that decide in favor of Google, transforms the definition of transformative. Now we are told transformative simply means, at least for computer code, a use that will help others create new products. This is the case in a nutshell. This is the thing to walk away with. Nobody knows what transformative means right now. Does this mean you can go take that WordPress interface and copy it and build your own system? Yes, no. Again, this is an opinion. It's not law, which means that fair use law would still say no. How would the Supreme Court rule? Well, I think the first question is, would you want to exhaust the funds to get to the Supreme Court? Because this is a very interesting point now, where the Justice Thomas is basically saying, I understand on part why you guys ruled the way you did, but let's be honest, you completely changed the definition of transformative. You completely ignored what the law states to rule this way. In other words, you spent about an hour with me. What's the takeaway from this hour? This is the most significant ruling of our time in terms of computer code, in my opinion. But we don't actually know what it means. What's going to happen is we're going to see interfaces get copied. We're going to see people copying code. We're going to see more examples of Oracle versus Google and Google versus Oracle. And until we have more precedent from the lower courts, we don't know where the line of familiarity and functionality starts and stops. We don't know where the line of transformative versus just copying somebody's code for the same purposes starts and stops. We don't know what's too much code starts and stops. So there's a lot of things that we don't know. So while this case means that we now hypothetically can, doesn't mean that we should. But again, you should be cognizant of what's happened, what it means. When someone says, hey, I can do this, you understand where your protections are. When someone says, I'm going to sue you for patent infringement, you go, you have no clue what you're talking about. But again, proceed with caution. Don't take anything I say as legal advice. Talk to a lawyer. Again, I'm going to say it one more time. Everything in this presentation, not legal advice, not a lawyer, not telling you what you should do. Anything you walk away going, oh, I could do this, or I should do this, or I should protect this, or I should do this. Talk to someone who's experienced, talk to an attorney, get their opinion. Again, this is meant to be informative and entertaining if you're kind of interested in the history of computer law and what's been happening in this industry, as I have been, because for those of us working closely in the API space, this has been the big question. What would happen? Could someone sue an API company because their web API interface is too similar to their interface because they implement similar standards? If we use the same short names or properties, would that cause issues? So that's where this case became such a big deal. And the answer is, we feel confident that like certain things like web APIs, we're not going to run into a lot of issues if there's similarities or commonalities. But at the same time, we don't know where that starts and stops. So instead of trying to copy WordPress's API and build your own CMS, and for those of us, a huge fan of Automatic, please know I'm picking on WordPress because they're the most popular CMS system out there. I would never suggest you do that. I think it's a great solution. But instead of doing that, where we can be successful is one, by focusing on the standards. And this is where I think we're going to see more organizations go, is focusing on how do we create unified standards? How do we create unified interfaces? How do we continue to see developments coming out of PHP Fig or the Worldwide Consortium or the Open API specification and other groups? And the reason this is so important is because those newly defined standards and those universal interfaces that we're all promoted and we're all allowed to use eliminate the problem of having to go figure out what's familiarity, what's functionality altogether. And they're going to help companies drive interoperability without having the competitive challenge, without fighting each other. And we're seeing more and more companies where this is what they're doing. After all these fights, we're seeing companies start joining, Linux Foundation working groups and saying, let's start working on commonalities, in the communication space. Let's start working on, standards for browser-based voice and video communication to WebRTC, instead of each of us trying to create our own standard and build that. So we're starting to see the output here, which is good because companies are moving forward. And really what we're seeing is competitors helping other competitors drive innovation with the idea that, hey, we don't mind helping you because we think we can do it better. And that's okay. Again, I just want to kind of end with what Jester Breyer said. The record here demonstrates the numerous ways in which re-implementing interface can further the development of computer programs. When we look at the legalese aspect, I already said the other statement was the most important. We look at the future of computing. We look at the power of innovation, our ability to innovate and work together as developers. This is the most powerful statement to me in the ruling, that the Supreme Court recognizes that interfaces, the ability to re-implement programs, the ability to extend and build upon programs that's going to be what drives us in the future, and that's going to make our ability to innovate faster, more efficient, and give us the ability to do so beyond even our own visions or comprehension at this point. I'm excited to see how working together and having unified standards will drive us to that next generation of technology. Much like I can't imagine gigabit internet today or having smart home devices that talk to me back when I was still trying to connect to 16 megabytes 16 kilobyte dial-up internet. Again, this is what's going to drive us, and it's so important that we focus on standards, focus on interfaces, and focus on working together. With that, if you're curious about learning more, here are a few different resources you can go to learn more about the case. Again, copyright.gov, learn about fair use, look at the legal definitions. Shahipla does a great job explaining software patents, legal on the decision. That's a great article. And of course, the Supreme Court opinion and Wikipedia overview. More great resources to look at. And with that, that's my time. I'm happy to take any questions or talk about different aspects of what might mean if people are interested in hearing my opinion. Otherwise, I'll leave this with this, which is of the three cities I mentioned, by the way, picking on Atlanta, Boston, Austin. Since I'm at a communications company, I do have to pick a winner, and I have to give a special shout out to Atlanta. And Logan, I think this is going to be all too familiar for you here, because Atlanta has the best area code of all those cities, with their area code of 404, which, by the way, I was in Atlanta. I walked up to a coworker and I said, yeah, I tried looking at your number up in the phone book, but I couldn't find it. And yeah, he didn't find it funny. He didn't even get it. He's just like, oh, I'm not in the phone book. Like, I gave you my cell and I gave up. But again, a huge thank you, everybody, for having me. Huge thank you for the chance to speak to, again, three of my favorite cities and those online. And again, I'm happy to answer your questions either here, or you can ping me on Twitter at Mike Gisto.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, man. That was great.
I'm just glad that other people enjoy this stuff as much as I do, because I'm not gonna lie, this is my favorite presentations, and I totally geeked out. My fiance loves playing video game stuff. She's looking at me going like, "You're reading a Supreme Court ruling opinion. Why?" So thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone who paid attention and enjoyed this as much as I did.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure, Mike. This is this is a huge impact to our industry. So I think you've done a good job of summarizing the history and kind of like the different decisions and kind of like the following the path that where we got to the state of things today. So yeah, thank you for putting that together. So the Q&A section, feel free to ask Q&A in Zoom, and you can just use the Q&A button at the bottom. Also, YouTube chat, just give us a minute or two to kind of like read through YouTube chat and find your question. So I like getting things started off with the initial question to kind of spur some discussion here. And one thing that kind of like stood out for me is like, I couldn't remember, when was the first lawsuit again? Was it 2010, 2011?
Yeah, yep. So Oracle acquired Sun in 2010, and they filed the first lawsuit immediately following. I believe it was in 2010. And then the first, again, you know how these things go. It took a couple years for them to go to trial. And so the trials actually happened in 2012, and the first verdict occurred in 2012.
Okay. Because I was like, all right, because I remember like Kotlin exists now and is like a replacement for Java. And then, but like Google came up with Dart, since this lawsuit came out. So I did some Googling and Kotlin was started in 2011, and then Dart was in 2011 as well. Go was actually a little bit before that in 2009. So I don't know if there's been any news or kind of like, did they create these languages, kind of like as um, a result of like, Oracle buying Sun and kind of like their concern about like Android and all this other stuff that was happening. Maybe, I mean, um, Kotlin's definitely still used pretty frequently today. I don't know. I mean, I guess I hear things about Dart in like the mobile, building mobile apps and stuff like that. Go is definitely huge. Yeah, I don't know if you can comment kind of, or you remember reading any news about like, what Google did kind of, or how they changed as a company as a result of this lawsuit.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so, I'm gonna be a little fuzzy on the dates because it's been a while since I dug into this. But essentially, what had happened is there was another open source framework that had kind of these interfaces for Java's SE. And that's where Google actually got a lot of the code was from this other framework. So it wasn't like they went into Sun and took the code. They grabbed out of this other system that had kind of been open sourced a little bit, um, which also kind of added a twist to the case. Uh, when Oracle acquired, they then sued, and I want to say it was actually around by 2010 that Google had actually removed many pieces of the offending code or many pieces of the code that they'd received from Java SE and had rewritten aspects of it. And so if I recall correctly, I think it was 2010. Basically, Java SE was for the most part removed from Android, outside of having similar interfaces. Oracle was still suing for past damages because there are all those years. And again, they had Oracle when they bought Sun. A big reason they bought Sun was for Java. That was the technology that they really wanted. And to your point, not only was Google working on other things and other projects, but they felt that if Google could basically create a copycat of their software, they could create a copyright of Java and get away with it, then anybody could create a copyright of Java. So it wasn't just looking at Google as a competitor, but looking at the larger ecosystem. And now PHP has Java libraries and Java support, so now Java developers can work in PHP or PHP developers can work in Java. Things like that. That's a silly statement, but that was their concern because again they had just invested in buying this company for this technology. So that was number one. Number two, again, I think they looked at dollar signs because again, Java ME, I believe, was being used, and I could be mistaken here, but I believe it was actually used to power the BlackBerry at one point in time, which dominated the market. And then BlackBerry actually got rid of Java ME and moved to Android. And so that was one of the challenges there, that they saw this huge market share loss. And because of that, not only did they want to defend their software and defend their proprietary offerings, but they also wanted to go back and try to claim some of the damages because they felt they had a case in the billions and billions of dollars, which is why when the $150,000 ruling came out, they never even tried to collect judgment. They immediately appealed and said this is a joke. And of course, I'm paraphrasing. But so I'd say it's more about protecting what they had, protecting their investment, ensuring that other people didn't go and rip off and create these solutions. And to your point, trying to make sure that Google didn't just replicate Java. And again, Google did pull out the Java elements. They started building their own things, but the damage had already been done.
Yeah, I mean, I think like everybody on this call is probably like open source advocates, and we all use open source software. So I think everybody here is probably was rooting for Google, along the way. And it was, I remember being kind of like heartbroken every time like they would go back, and then like the federal um circuit court or whatever would be like, no, Oracle, there's something here. So I'm happy that as a lover of open source, like I'm happy that the Supreme Court eventually got it right in my mind. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends, right? Like, it's not like Google went and rated Java ME and then like copied like their code and then like, came out with Google ME, right? Like, it's not like they did some espionage and like just like copied this like closed source application. They're like, yeah, let's kind of take the good ideas and then like kind of make a new thing, right? Like, so yeah, I mean, I guess the value, that they're bringing the transformative work that they created is made all the difference.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's why that initial part is so important is, and I apologize, I kept calling it mobile edition. It's micro edition. So I apologize
Oh,
about that. But I think that's why it's so important is that on one point you could say to your point, they didn't go rip the code out from Sun. They didn't go cheat him out of the code. But at the same time, they were willing to pay Sun Microsystems $50 million to use the code. And when they couldn't reach an agreement, then they kind of bypassed that. And that's what I think is interesting about this case is, very, very candidly, and I'm in the same boat, by the way. I'm all for open source, want strong community and want interfaces. But it's interesting because it's one of those cases where, honestly, to me, there wasn't a clear winner. It wasn't like Google was clearly in the right, or it wasn't like Oracle was clearly in the right. And I think the split decision in the Supreme Court showed that. I think the decisions between the district and federal circuits showed that. And I think it's been interesting to see what happens long term. But you're right. It was definitely an interesting solution. I think that's why the space was so divided, where you had open source advocates saying this is great, and then you had people going, "Well, I don't want people to be able to take my code, and if they don't pay me for it, just use it." But yeah, it's like I said, there's a lot more intricacies in there, obviously, than we can fit in this time. But it was an interesting evolution.
Cool. All right. So Catherine here, I had posed a question back when you're talking about WordPress, and what would it make a difference that WordPress is an open source project? I think you kind of answered that, but maybe do you want to talk about like how like GPL or because WordPress is under the GPL, and kind of like revisit kind of the differences between WordPress and an API? That might be a way to answer that question.
Yeah, and I'll go a little bit higher level than digging into GPL itself. When you look at open source has different licenses. You have GPL, GPL2, MIT, Apache, CPAL, etc. And so every open source license states what you can and cannot do with that application. There are some open source licenses that say absolutely copy paste, do whatever you want. No attribution needed. There's some that say copy paste whatever you want, just give us credit. There's some that say, you can do copy and paste as long as it's not for commercial purposes. Or there are others that say you can use certain elements as long as it's transformative work. So getting into that, you have to look at the individual license and understand what the individual license states in terms of what you can and cannot do. For example, CPAL, again, you can reuse it as long as it's not for commercial purposes. And even with CPAL, there can be restrictions where you can use it for personal purposes, even though it's an open source app. But if you upload it to a production environment, now you have to buy a production license. We see things like with that. I believe Java SE is actually very similar, where you can use it in certain environments, but you have to get a license at certain level. Although I could be mistaken on that. So looking at the license, and obviously the license is going to be different. I pick on WordPress just again because I think everyone's familiar with it. The key there would be if WordPress isn't open source or doesn't have a license that supports your ability to take elements and repurpose them or copy and paste them, could you still do so? And that's where the real question comes. And another key component of that question would be, how did you obtain access to that code? And did you obtain access to that code legally to be able to copy and paste it in the first place? But when it comes to open source, again, I'm not going to play the lawyer card because I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to give legal advice. look at the open source license, evaluate the open source license. And it's always recommended to work with somebody who is a legal expert, or work with your attorney to determine whether or not you can use that code in certain ways. Logan,
Cool.
do you like how I dodged that question completely?
Yeah, that was good. That was good. Almost like you had some legal training there, or political training. So Ian, kind of like, I think this kind of is a follow up, or related to the GPL. So recently, June 29th, there's news that came out where GitHub, Open API. So in case, for those that you don't know, Microsoft went to Open API and obtained an exclusive license to build GPL3 products, using this language model that Open API built. And so Microsoft Azure now has, some things that you can go in and do, Open API stuff with. And Microsoft owns GitHub. And so now GitHub, and they went and built this Open API autocomplete tool based off of all of the code that's on GitHub. There's really not any, I think the problem is we don't know what code was used to build the autocomplete stuff that GitHub did. I think this kind of brings into question is like, the GPL license says you have to have a GPL license for any derivative work that uses GPL code. But what GitHub did, and this thing that they have built, is that transformative? Like, how kind of, do you have any opinions, Mike, kind of like on this Open API autocomplete stuff that they did recently?
Yeah, and I think you're referencing to GitHub Copilot. Is that the same thing?
Copilot. Yeah,
Yep.
Copilot. Yep.
So I don't have in-depth knowledge about Copilot, so I'm going to give a very broad opinion on that. But I think it's going to talk about, when we look at the legal aspects, all the nuances that go into it. First of all, as great as it is to see companies coming together and forming these, working groups such as OAS, there's always risk of a company gaining an exclusive license, or dominating, or taking control of it and boxing other companies out, especially larger companies. And my hope is that doesn't happen, that the companies always put the community first. And so when you have a working group like OAS, and for those who are not familiar with OAS but maybe familiar with Swagger, Swagger was the previous name before it became the Open API specification under the Open API initiative. My hope would be that anything that they build there is available to anybody, where anybody can build something similar, that there's not exclusive licenses to proprietary technology from that working group. I understand if Microsoft builds your own thing, that's different, because we can all build tools that support open specifications. But hopefully, again, there's nothing exclusive that says Microsoft gets this portion of OAS and nobody else can touch it. I haven't heard that. I'm not familiar with that. That's not to say that's not the case. I just don't know. And I hope that's not the case. Moving into Copilot gets into several interesting legal aspects to me. And the first and most important legal aspect to me is actually not the open source licenses. It's the GitHub user agreement. Because if GitHub has a clause in their user agreement that people agreed to, saying you're allowing us to use your code for these purposes, then regardless of what was done, the GitHub user license.
Oh,
when you create your GitHub account. And this is what a lot of companies do. And initially they do it for their own protection. But as they span that they're covered, they say, I can do this now. And so if if that was in their terms of service or the GitHub user license, effectively they did have permission to do that. Now, should they? Again, I'm going to address that separately. I'm just saying that that's legal nuance number one to me. Again, not as a lawyer. Legal nuance number two then is what code did they access? Because if they had anything in their terms of service that they wouldn't review private code, which my guess is they don't. But again, I don't know. I haven't gone through their terms of service. Or if they have anything that said they wouldn't go through your code unless it was open source, then did they adhere to that? The third question, to your point, is how are they using the code? Is it something where I start typing something for your code and it automatically fills that in for me? And by the way, it's proprietary. To me, that's a big red flag. Is it something where, going back to WordPress, I'm working on a WordPress plugin, I start typing in and it automatically fills in the WordPress action hook for me? I see that more as a helper function and as a part of the community. And again, I'm very careful because these are very distinct use cases. I'm not going to react adversely to that. I kind of think that's nice. And if I was on the Automatic team, I'd say this is nice because it's allowing people to build more efficiently with WordPress. So there could be a win-win. But I think that should have been communicated prior. I think that's the thing GitHub has done most. The most horrible aspect with what limited knowledge I have of Copilot is how they've communicated it. In terms of being transformative, again, if it's something where they took all this code to create a giant intelligent system that could autofill things for you based on patterns it learned, etc., I think that would fit as a transformative work. If it's literally saying I'm going to look at the code and try to guess the next line of code verbatim, then I would argue, again, and it doesn't matter what I say because it's my opinion, it doesn't matter, but I'd argue that would probably not be transformative or fair use. But again, that's my opinion, that's my thoughts on it. And it really depends, again, what code did they use, what agreements were in place, and regardless, I think this is a faux pas that we can all learn from because we all have users of some sort with the systems we build, and that is making sure we communicate transparently with our users, that our users know exactly what's going on. And I think in the case of GitHub, as we find out more, I think some fears will be realized and some fears will be relieved. Had they communicated that in advance and said, here's exactly what we're doing. We're gonna have a webinar if you have questions, ping us, we're gonna do a quick demo so you can see it. Had they announced it that way with the community, I think that they would have kept the trust versus having the reaction they're having now.
Yeah, I think I saw a TikTok or a video of somebody else watching a TikTok like twice removed or something, and the Copilot was auto completing JavaScript code. So it is confusing. Like there's OpenAI the company, and then like OpenAI that used to be Swagger, the .org.
My apologies. Yes, I confused the two there. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. And I might have said the wrong thing. It's GPT-3, not GPL-3. Those two things exist are completely different. But yeah, they used GPT-3 from the OpenAI company to build Copilot.
Okay, so I'll just say this right now. Because it might just be it's getting late for me. I heard OAS and I was really concerned for a second. That was my next thing I was gonna run to on my computer is googling that. So again, yeah, I think to your point, it really depends. Is it auto completing that JavaScript because it grabbed that code from somebody's repository, or is it auto completing that JavaScript because it learned how people are typing from taking all these patterns of code and now it's guessing what the next similar to like how PHP Storm kind of guesses what you're typing when you start typing a class name. Is it that type of algorithm, or is it something where it's copy and pasting people's code? But again, I think to your point, I think the community feels betrayed because, quite frankly, they took our code, our work, to make a commercial product from it, without talking to us, without being transparent with us. On the flip side, and I'm going to get myself in trouble here, would the reaction have been the same if another company had spidered Google's GitHub repositories, learned from it, built their own system, and released it without announcing it? So I guess without knowing what they did, it's hard for me to say they're absolutely in the wrong or they're absolutely in the right. But again, assuming they did everything by the book and they were within their rights and that they acted with the best interest of the community in mind, they should have communicated it and they should have been prepared for this type of response, which just based on the lack of communication, and I'm getting myself in trouble because I have very good friends at GitHub. I think could have been preempted, and I think developers are justified in being upset and being concerned.
Yeah. I mean, it's not clear, what they did or how they did it, but and it's probably, they're being very careful. It only happened, a week or so ago, but I think they're going to be very careful on like what they say next, given like the impact on potential for lawsuits and whatnot. So hopefully we'll learn more, and I'm interested in kind of like obviously like if we can make the developers lives easier and kind of make developers more productive, then okay, great. I don't know if this is eventually going to like lead to that, but it'll be interesting to see where it goes. Cool. Do we have more questions? Let's see here. Do you see the comment from Gene in the Q&A, Mike?
Give me 1 second. I gotta try switching my screen here, see if I can see it. Hopefully it's.
I think that might be a.
Gene, I will listen to the song you sent. Apparently, right now I hit the wrong.
So you must have all.
How do I turn this off?
Remote monitoring management, remote access, patch management, help
Then
desk.
I
Mike,
apologize
the DJ
because my
now.
computer's locked up, but I actually can't like
Or
stop it.
Get it all.
Well, oh, there you go.
There we go.
It's playing an ad. Please come to Boston. That's all I saw.
Well, like I said, Boston's one of my favorite cities. My terrible confession, though, moving from Minnesota to the Bay Area, is I try to avoid Boston in the winter. But I promise, as soon as I get to Boston, like that ad said, I'll be on my way. Which raises another question as we talk about ethics and everything else. Here we are talking about artificial intelligence and talking about cities. If I'm getting an ad for Boston after talking about how much I love Boston, I'm just leaving it out there.
Yeah, true. Well, I'm gonna have to. Gene, can we share the link to YouTube, the video to everyone on YouTube? Do you mind? So everyone can. All right. Here's the video that Gene shared.
I just realized the song is called "Please Come to Boston." That makes me feel better. I thought you were saying I had a Boston ad showing on my YouTube, and I'm like, okay, my Alexa's muted. I don't know what to do now.
Yeah, who knows? It's this IT solution. Some guy wants to sell you some devs, probably. Catherine says, Mike, thank you for this great info. Your knowledge of detail about this history is really amazing. I agree.
No, like I said, thank you. Like I said, this was a super fun talk. This is an incredible group, and I'm really honored to be here. And like I said, for people's willingness to listen to me ramble for well over an hour. So again, thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me talk about something that I'm passionate about.
Awesome. Ben, did you have anything?
No, I'm good. Thanks for coming on, Mike. Really appreciate too the short notice. We were scrambling to find a speaker last minute, and Mike really stepped up for us, and we appreciate that.
Thank you.
What really happened, just to share the behind the scenes story, is Ben said, "Hey, where are you doing on the 8th? And by the way, I know a whole bunch of embarrassing stories about you." No, I'm just kidding. Ben, Logan, like I said, it's my pleasure to be here. This is such a great group. And you guys do so much for the community that it's the least I could do. And I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mike. We look forward to seeing you here in Austin in October. I'm assuming you're coming.
My plan is to be there. That reminds me, actually, I got to get my ticket. But Absolutely, I wouldn't miss it for the world. And again, I already did a shameless plug, but I'm gonna do another one. Absolutely, if you have the chance to get to Longhorn PHP, one, it's a great event. Two, tremendous speakers. Even though they got that Adam Culp guy speaking, I mean, if you haven't heard Adam, Adam's a tremendous, tremendous keynote speaker. Um, Great community. If you've never been to Austin, Austin's just an amazing city all around. With so much to do. Like you look at the different cities, like you go to Austin. Maybe I'm gonna be a tourist here. You'll check out Sixth, check out Rainy Street. Again, just there's so much to do there. But again, it's so important to me that we support these events because Longhorn is again the only conference happening in person in the U.S. this year. And I have the privilege of organizing Middle PHP, and I know how much work that is, and it was virtual. And it's really important to make sure that we're supporting the conference so that we don't just have Longhorn this year, we have it next year, the year after, because the reality is without these community events, there are a lot of people who wouldn't be, who can't attend, the other conferences out there. So, if you have the opportunity, I definitely look forward to seeing you in Austin in October.
Awesome. That's great. Well, sounds good. Thank you so much for speaking, Mike. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Ben, for stepping up and filling in there for Boston and the crew out east. We'll see you all next month. I believe we already have a talk lined up. So, yep.
It was fun. Thanks all.
All right. Recording stopped. All right. Bye for real this time.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.